Hey everyone, it's Night Horror here, and today I've got a better heavy attack Sorc build. So I see so many of these builds out in the wild, and the main draw is like, hey, they're easy. That's true, but a lot of them are not optimized. And this build that I'm going to show you today is just as easy as all of those other builds, but I think you'll find that it gives you more damage. But the reason I'm doing this build today is I have a really good friend who's also happens to be a content creator. She goes by Noni Stress Relief, and you can find her on Twitch, and I'll link her down below. But Noni, besides just being a friend, she is also one of our main raid leads at the That Wasn't the Boss Discord server. And she came to me the other day and said, hey, I need some help with all the changes to the passives and different sets for the heavy attack builds. She has to use a heavy attack build because of some accessibility issues that she has. And we have plenty of people like this in the Discord server, by the way. And even if it's not like, hey, I can't use it, sometimes it's just nice to be able to use kind of a more accessible build. I know I have an overuse entry and it helps me sometimes. So anyway, she came to me though and was like, hey, I'm not doing enough damage. And she's right now leading a veteran hard mode Rockrove group. And so, you need a lot of damage for these hard mode trials. And so she's like, what can you do? Can you help me to get more damage? And I looked around, I know there's a lot of easy Sorc builds, the easiest Sorc and the even more easier Sorc or whatever. All heavy attack sorcerer builds are, generally speaking, pretty easy. I think the main thing though is them being the most efficient so that you can really contribute to your group. And it's not like, hey, they're kind of carrying you and you're not doing enough DPS. So I compared this to some other creators out there, and I found that this build does between 30 and 40% more damage, easily 20k and more on some. But anyways, with that, let's go ahead and get in and talk about some of these skills. Okay, so first up here, we have our Wall of Elements. Now we're going to go with Blockade for this because it has a little bit longer duration and we want to be able to heavy attack more. You could use Unstable Wall. It's just going to be a little bit harder if you're casting several skills, but I would recommend Blockade. It also has a little bit bigger area, which can be nice if you're kind of kiting and running around solo and stuff like that, or in an arena. After that, we have Daedric Prey. Daedric Prey is the Morphew one of this. I hear sometimes, people talking about Haunting Curse being better in content or whatever. It's only better because it does more AoE damage, but the actual truth about most content in ESO is that it's actually not AoE focused. And I think even Zynode has said this recently in one of his videos, that it's the big guy, it's the boss that dies last. And so it's really the single target damage that matters the most. And almost all fights actually are, at their heart, single target fights if you have enough damage to cleave down all of the smaller ads, which have much, much lower health. And usually you do. So definitely go with Daedric Prey here. It will provide you with the most damage. A note about Daedric Prey, you need to make sure the skill goes off. There's an explosion at the end, and if you recast the skill early, it will not go off. So you want to make sure the skill goes all the way down, blows up, and then you recast it. If you're at all worried about clipping it or recasting it too early, I would just go ahead and do another heavy attack and then recast it afterwards. And then next up here, we have a flex spot. So I'm recommending Bound Armaments, but you could use something else. Bound Armaments, whenever we heavy attack, it's going to give us 2 stacks. And then at 4 stacks, we'll go ahead and cast this skill. And that's all you really have to do with Bound Armaments. Is just heavy attack. When you get 4 stacks, cast the skill. Not really too much to it. Now, this is a flex spot, so if you wanted to put in just like one survival skill on your bar, this is probably where I would put it. So if you want to put a shield or something else, this is probably where I would put it. However, it's very important if you're in group content. There's 2 skills below this. Both of the skills below this are from our Dark Magic skill line, and there is a passive called Exploitation. Exploitation provides minor prophecy whenever we cast the skill from this skill line to our party members, which provides them with a little over 1,300 critical. That is a massive amount of critical, and it basically equates to around 5 to 6% increased critical strike chance. That is huge if you were in a party. And I so often see on heavy attack builds that there is not a skill from the Dark Magic skill line, or there's one and they tell you not to use it or something. You absolutely want to be using any kind of group content. You want to be using some skill from this skill line to provide you with that buff, if there's not another Sorc in the group doing it. So again, if you're the only sorcerer in a group, you definitely want to slot one of these other skills as opposed to Bound Armaments to make sure that the exploitation passive is always up. And if you're just using it, this lasts for 20 seconds, so you don't really have to think too much about it. Just cast it periodically. If you instead decide to go with Crystal Weapon, all you need to do is cast this and then heavy attack. And you can do that whenever your other abilities don't need to be cast. If you go with something like Crystal Fragments, generally I would wait until Crystal Fragments procs. And what I mean by that that is when you cast other abilities, there is a 33% chance that crystal fragments will be insta-cast and will also do increased damage the next time you cast it. And so what you can do is you can cast your Wall of Elements, you can cast your Daedric Prey, and then whenever crystal fragments procs, just go ahead and cast that. And it'll happen more than once every 20 seconds, and so you can just keep it up that way. And other than that, you just heavy attack. And then if we're needing more survivability, we're worried about dying or something like that, you can swap in Hardened Ward. Hardened Ward provides us with a huge damage shield. And since we're heavy attacking, we're always going to have kind of infinite mana, right? We'll have full magicka at all times because we're always heavy attack skill, heavy attack skill. But putting Hardened Ward here in place of our flex spot will provide us with a ton of survivability. Now, we will not be proccing our passive from the Dark Magic skill line, so we will be losing some critical, but again, we're kind of already realizing like, hey, we want to be more survivable, and to do that, you almost always have to sacrifice some damage. Now, after that, we have our two pets. We're going to go with the Volatile Familiar and then the Twilight Tormentor. You can actually actively cast these skills, but you don't need to. And I would recommend just never doing that. Just leave them, like you can do it right before you're going to pull or something like that for a little bit extra damage, but in content, I would never actually cast these skills. As long as your pets are out, don't worry about it. They will do plenty of damage on their own, and as long as we keep that Daedric Prey up, that works synergistically. It helps us do more damage with our pets, and so it increases the damage that these guys are going to do. Now, if you do need some sort of self-heal in group content, and generally you shouldn't have to slot more than one thing, what I would recommend is changing the morph on our Twilight Tormentor to the Twilight Matriarch. We do lose a little bit of damage, but it's a huge heal, and we don't have to swap anything else out on our bar, so we don't really lose very much DPS. I so often see in group content that people will have all these like survival skills on their bar. Whenever you're in group content, unless it's like a random pug or something like that, but any kind of organized group content, your job as a DPS is to do damage. And so you really don't want to be swapping out more than like one skill or two at the absolute most on your bar. But even two is usually overkill, right? You usually want to be relying on your healers to keep you alive, but sometimes you're in portals, sometimes, a healer is new or you're in a pug or something, so the Twilight Matriarch can be a great way to go. After that, we have our Storm Atronach. The Storm Atronach works really well again with our Daedric Prey as it increases the damage of our pets, which the Storm Atro is. The greater Storm Atro is best for single target damage, and again, as we talked about earlier, all fights essentially are single target, or almost all fights are single target, because it is the one ad with the boss with the biggest health that is the hardest to kill, and everything else will die way before it in most circumstances. There are a few notable exceptions, but by and large, that is true. If you are just kind of grinding or doing a lot of AoE kind of focused stuff, you could remorph to the charged Atronach, which summons several of them, and that does more AoE damage, and that's totally fine. But for single target damage, if you're in like an optimized kind of trial or a dungeon group or something like that, I would still go with the Greater Storm Atronach. And if you are in a situation where you do have a lot of ads, then you could go with something like the Mage's Guild Comet. And the reason for that is because you get ulti back for each ad that you hit with this. And so if you're in a situation, again, where you're kind of AoE grinding or something like that, you can be able to cast this skill quite often. So you have Hardened Ward here, we have our Twilight Matriarch for a heal, and then we're pretty much good to go. We have our Unstable Wall for off balance, which helps us do more damage with our heavy attacks, and then our Daedric Prey, which just hits so hard, it's really hard not to want to use it. Now moving on to CP. So for our blue CP here, I have Fighting Finesse, Deadly Aim, Weapons Expert, and Exploiter. And if you were in group content where the ads and the bosses and everything are going to be turned away from you, then you can swap out Fighting Finesse for Backstabber, which will give you increased critical damage. If you're running around solo, if you're doing the new Endless Archive or something like that, then I would stick with Fighting Finesse. We'll use the Thief Mundus. That increases our critical strike chance. And then for gear, the one major set that you want for any heavy attack build is Sergeant's Mail. And this drops from Wayrest Sewers, both 1 and 2. You don't need to run on Vet, just run it on normal. And then our next set here is Arms of Reliquin, and this drops from Cloudrest. This is a trial, but you could run this on normal and get these pieces. And you only need body pieces, so you can run a +0. It's actually pretty easy to do. Cloudrest can be a little crazy because there's people running around everywhere, but on normal, anybody can complete normal Cloudrest, I promise you. And really, Reliquin here is kind of like the secret sauce of this build. So Reliquin is a set that I don't think too many people realize was so good as a heavy attack set. And honestly, it has always been just as good as any other heavy attack set. The only thing is it is a trial set and it is single target. But again, as we already kind of established, all fights are single target fights in essence, or almost all fights. And then after that, of course, we have the Oakensole Ring, and then we're using one-piece Slime Crawl. Slime Crawl drops from Wayrest Sewers 1. You do have to run it on Veteran, though, to get the monster helm. You can, and again, Wayrest Sewers is a very old dungeon, so it shouldn't be too hard. You should be able to do okay. Now, when you're first starting out, so I would just recommend running Wayrest Sewers to get Sergeant's Mail. You can run it on normal, wearing, your underwear. Like, you can run it in nothing. You'll be just fine. And then for your second set, if you don't have Arms of Reliquin yet, I would just go with something like Order's Wrath, which is a crafted set. I would craft it in medium. You do want one piece of light with this build, just to make sure you're at full penetration in most trial settings. Or if you plan to do mostly solo, then you could go with light. And the reason you want to go with light because it'll increase your penetration, and that's the most important thing to making sure you have maximum damage. Now, there are some other sets here. If you wanted to go with those, you could go with something like Noble Duelist. If you wanted a light set, like we just talked about, Storm Master works well. If you want maximum survivability for the Endless Archive, go with something like Iron Blood. I will note Iron Blood, while making you very tanky, it will also slow you down a bit. So realize that there is a snare effect with that. Or really any other heavy attack set or appropriate set you could use here. The main thing is that you just want Sergeant's Mail, and Reliquin does a ton of damage. Reliquin will easily do, 3 to 5k more than other sets. So it's it's free damage, I guess, is a way of putting it. And for food, what we're going to use is Sugar Skulls, or you can just use the crown food that you're normally, like you get as daily rewards. It looks like a turkey. Any food that provides you max of all 3 stats, you just want the most of that, because we don't really need recovery on this build, and the extra health will make us a little bit more survivable. I will note, if you're in group content, sometimes you will have too much health, and so you might not want to run something like Sugar Skulls, because that is normally kind of more tanking food, and in which case, I would just run food that just gives you max magicka. Just simple, plain green food that gives you max magicka. It'll give you like 6,000, and that'll actually increase your damage a little bit more, because having more max stats does equate to more damage. Now, I will note I didn't go over everything, but you can see on the parses here that all the information is provided. Over here, it has the weight of the various sets. I believe it's green for medium and blue for light. You can see all the enchants I have. We've got weapon damage, enchants on our jewelry, which gives us a little bit of recovery for our stamina. Bloodthirsty, we have a precise front bar with an increased weapon and spell damage enchant, and so on and so forth. And then for doing damage, all you gotta do is run up, drop your Wall of Elements, heavy attack, Daedric Prey, heavy attack. If you have your Storm Matro, go ahead and cast that. And then basically, whenever you're doing a heavy attack and one of your skills doesn't need to be refreshed, your Wall of Elements or Daedric Prey, then you can cast your Bound Armaments or Crystal Weapon. And again, if you're using the Crystal Frag, then you probably just want to wait for that to proc and then cast it then. Otherwise, you just heavy attack again. And really, that's all there is to the rotation. It's really simple. Heavy attack, keep up those 2 dots, cast your flex spot whenever you don't have something else to do. And that is it for a better heavy attack build. I hope this was helpful. I know a lot of people felt like, I can't get into content now since the nerfs to the various sets and setups for heavy attack. With this build, you should be able to get into just about all content in the game. Some groups like really high DPS for some of the hard modes or trifectas or something like that. But honestly, that's like 0.001% of content and people doing content. So it should be able to get you into just about everything. Just make sure that you're bringing something from the Dark Magic skill line so that you're contributing to the group. And it could be something you can ask either the raid lead or ask another Sorc, like, hey, are you running a skill from here? Or, hey, are you keeping up the exploitation passive? Or do I need to do that? Because, one of the reasons, there are some creators out there, for whatever reason, that will seriously disparage using the trial dummy to test and determine what damage is and stuff like that. And, a lot of people are like, oh, that's fake. You can't get that much damage in content. That's actually not true. You have to be in an organized group, but if you're in an organized group, you can actually do even better than what you can do on the dummy if it's a well enough organized group. So it's absolutely not fake damage. It's not cheese. It's not anything else. But part of it is making sure that you're bringing these unique class buffs. Some of the creators that kind of complain about the dummy and act like, it's not valid, it's not real damage. They'll make builds that won't proc these passives. And so you're just not giving that damage to the rest of the group. And so for them, it absolutely is true that the dummy probably does feel like cheating because they don't never have those buffs in their group. But if you build for it and if you have an optimized group, it can massively increase the damage of the group, and it can make getting through content so much more easy. Anyways, I'll put my soapbox away, but I just want people to know that, because the main thing I do here on the channel is I try to educate people, because to me, learning about games and kind of understanding how they work is part of the fun of it for me. But I know it's not for everybody, so I try to make it in a digestible and as short of a format as I can. Anyways, if you like this video, you want to see other videos like this, definitely hit the subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.